Sullivan Knoth was born in 1933 or 1937. Given the inconsistent information regarding his birth year, it can only be estimated. In 1966, he was employed as a shoe salesman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Throughout these years, Knoth suffered from financial problems and was on the verge of losing his business property due to large amounts of debt that he couldn't cover. Hopeless, Sullivan turned to a late-night evangelical talk radio station for consolation, but found no relief in the voice speaking out against the evils of extramarital adultery. As he listened to the preacher's discourse, he started to pick up something beneath the static, which he claimed was the very voice of God. The voice of God echoed Sullivan in his unhappiness with the world and its many churches, claiming that he would need a new and valiant preacher. The man went out into the night and beheld, in the dark sky, a prediction like that of the prophet Ezekiel, a dreadful, multi-sided heavenly creature that was crowned up in a fire, encircled by wheels within wheels. The vision bore a prediction about Sullivan, that he would usher a chosen few into paradise and deliver them from eternal condemnation before the end of time. Brimming with purpose, Sullivan forsook all his worldly belongings and set out to sermonize on the city streets of Albuquerque. His inspiration drew in people who were lost in the world and looked to him for counsel. Over the years, he gained several dozen adherents, all of whom had contributed their assets to a new church, nicknamed the Testament of New Ezekiel. They resided on a luxurious cattle ranch owned by a wealthy lady named Lydia Deegan. Sullivan would continue to hear messages from the Lord, which he faithfully documented in a verse book he entitled, The Gospel of Knoth. Sullivan would often highly encourage all women in the cult to reproduce regularly, even by donating his own seed for the cause and hand-delivering each baby in person. The deliveries at home gave New Mexico law enforcement the needed power to take measures targeting the cult. With a warrant for their arrest on charges of health and safety regulations, police stormed Deegan's homestead and rounded up about a dozen members of the cult. Knoth, in the meantime, narrowly fled with a fistful of cultists. All their assets were seized, and the cult faced a severe risk of imminent collapse. After the guidance of Moses and Abraham, Sullivan ascended a mountain by himself to commune with God. He stood on the mountaintop, bare naked in the wilderness, and waited for the voice to instruct him to have an eye sacrificed in return for his true vision. After listening to that, he unsheathed his knife and pierced his left eyeball. Through this deed, the very veil of reality fell away, and Knoth foresaw the destiny of his church with utmost certitude. He foresaw a village, hidden deep in the desert and concealed from human civilization, that would be the doorway to the very temple of the Testament of New Ezekiel. He would name this town Temple Gate and bring his disciples up there to make ready for the end of the ages. Knoth cautioned his flock that the journey would be long and the hardships would be many, and that all would be forced to make painful trade-offs and impossible decisions in the hope of eternal salvation and heaven. It was the winter of 1969 when Sullivan Knoth and nearly 100 supporters departed by caravan for the wilderness. In 1971, Knoth and his cohorts arrived at the site that would later develop into Temple Gate. The village was based in a remote area of the Havasupai Indian Reservation, where the tribesmen forcibly drove out the Pueblo, Jicanilla, Mescalero, and Navajo Indians who lived in the zone that Knoth had attempted to seize. In the Gospels, Knoth is skeptical about certain things. The speaker of the Gospels tells him that the Antichrist will be birthed from his own followers. After a time, Knoth is urged to slaughter the children in order to spare the paradise of Temple Gate. In a similar vein, it's conceivable that Knoth has sworn vows of celibacy, or, at the very least, to not wed. He is attracted to multiple women and is at a loss as to how to navigate his appetites. The voice, nevertheless, instructs him that he can have sex with the women in his herd. In fact, the Gospels show that the New Testament of Ezekiel does not outlaw that sin. It actually encourages men to engage in fornication with their daughters as long as their mothers are no longer alive. Under these practices, Knoth also violated and knocked up a 15-year-old Anna Lee, who is Ethan's daughter, and is later shot and killed by Pauline Glick in a hospital, becoming the Jane Doe who sends Lynn and Blake to Temple Gate. While Knoth's looming presence and influential role in Temple Gate is the lifeblood of the entire story, he is hardly ever seen. Most of his participation in the storyline is restricted to his passionate screams and gospel, which resonate throughout Temple Gate via the loudspeakers, or his demented disciples alluding to said works. His voice can be distinctly heard as he torments Lynn Langermann, a kidnapped journalist whose womb he assumes to be harboring the Antichrist. Later in the game, Lynn's husband Blake barges into the temple and hides in one of the confession booths, witnessing Knoth and his entourage as they violently torment a husband and his wife to extract the whereabouts of Lynn, who has fled the scene recently. Upon discovering that she is in the mines with the heretics, a faction that has deserted the Testament and wants the Antichrist to be birthed, Knoth brings the two of them painlessly out of their misery. Knoth also suffers from syphilis. Blake read that, in a piece of letter, someone wrote about the goings of some religious cultists to the external world to get gasoline, penicillin, and other amenities. Knoth has been lying to his parish congregation and has said that the penicillin is for his AIDS studies. But because Knoth engages in unsafe intercourse with numerous of the females in the cult, he has spread it to others. While a rumor flies about that he could have syphilis and gonorrhea at the same time, Knoth forces them to go to a segregated campsite. His excuse is telling the afflicted that they are aggrieved with a sickness of the soul that only the right penance can redeem. Shortly after, these people become the scalded. At the game's end, Knoth has one last encounter with Blake after Lynn passes away during childbirth in the church. Knoth informs Blake that he has butchered the entire town and failed in his mission, that it's too little too late, and that the Antichrist has already been reborn, meaning that the apocalypse is now imminent. Knoth is bitter, saying that God has grown silent after the torment and that he speaks with him no longer, strongly implicating that the God was radio signals beamed from the towers owned by the Murkoff Corporation. He becomes conflicted after killing his offspring and those of his disciples, thus declaring that there can be no more faultless faith than that, only to find himself still mystified by the silence of his God. He had assumed that God would not forsake him or stay silent after his sacrifices. Obligated by his own creed, he does not indulge in killing Blake's infant son and, instead, implores him to murder the newborn. As he descends further into madness, he states ruefully, "I know God doesn't hear dead men, but I expect he answers them," before slitting his own throat. Only hours before his death, Knoth is revealed to be poisoning his own flock with glasses of cyanide under the promise that their children will be watching over them. As those events develop, the colony of ants inhabited by the Walrider starts to swarm the radio towers until they are destroyed and a storm comes. After several hours following the incident, Pauline Glick and several Murkoff agents conduct an investigation into the consequences of the fallout. They remove Knoth's remains while grumbling about his weight. Pauline remarks that his death was not the result of cyanide poisoning, and one of the agents next to her replies that some got inventive when it came to their deaths. Meanwhile, Simon Peacock mentions Knoth amid his interrogation of Paul Marion, ruminating on the fact that Murkoff absolutely needed a delivery mechanism for the morphogenic engine to spread the so-called infection. It turns out that Knoth's cult fitted that purpose like a glove. By the end, Simon weighs in on the madness Murkoff wrought to the Holy Trinity, labeling Rudolf Wernicke as the Father, the Walrider as the Son, and Sullivan Knoth as the Holy Spirit,